Amen. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to get a slideshow geared up here. Jacob, can we flick over? It's already open there. You just need to flick open to the PowerPoint and then present it. I have a clicker, so I have all the power. I got the power. So tonight, our first night, week one of this Lenten formation series, I think is what we're calling it, is on God is great. Later on, we're going to talk about God is good. Eventually, we're going to talk about God is present. And we're going to end on God is moving. So I have to start off by saying that I love my mother. First of all, because I think she might be watching on live stream. And, and second of all, because my first story is about an experience that I had with my mother. So my mother won a trip to Hawaii a few years ago. Sounds nice. It was like cold and windy here today. I could use some Hawaii. But my mother at that time had never really traveled. She was and is very nervous about flying, and she had never really gone anywhere outside of the immediate vicinity, and so she didn't take the trip. Instead, she got travel vouchers, and these travel vouchers she could use to kind of plan her own trip. But they had a time limit on them. Eventually, they would expire, and she couldn't use them anymore, and the time was running short. So I thought, to get my mother to use these travel vouchers and have a good experience, that for my birthday that was upcoming, I think it might have been my 30th birthday, I said, hey Mom, why don't you take me to Las Vegas using your travel vouchers? I thought everyone there speaks English. You know, it's not that far. There's no time change. She was a little bit concerned about the time change to Hawaii. I would fly with her. I've not flown that much, but, you know, I can navigate an airport. And so this was my compromise, was for my mom to take me to Las Vegas. And I enjoy gambling. I'll just admit that. I don't do it a lot. Like once a year, you know, once I start losing, then I realize that I don't enjoy it as much as I thought I enjoyed it. But I do occasionally enjoy it. And when I was there, I really wanted to play blackjack, okay? Because I learned how to play roulette, and I played some roulette, but I wanted to play some blackjack while I was there. But all these blackjack tables were like $10 buy-ins. So for the non-gamblers among us, what that means is you put $10 on the table, they give you 2 cards, you decide if you hit or not, and if you bust, or if you don't have a hand that's higher than the dealer, which takes all of 45 seconds to play out a hand, if you lose, they just take your $10. Now, I don't have a lot of money, so that hurts. So it's like, man, I want to play blackjack, but I can't do this $10 thing. So eventually, just off of the strip, I saw a sign, $2 blackjack. I was like, Mom, we need to go there. I need to go to that place. I want to play $2 blackjack. I can afford that. So that night, me and my mom went to Hooters. I went for the blackjack. We're all wearing masks, but I can see the judgment. But one of the other amazing things that we did, other than Hooters, was we went to the Hoover Dam. Okay, so we got on a bus, we took a ride to the Hoover Dam, and I paid a little bit extra for us to do a boat tour. Okay, so we drove up to the Hoover Dam, and immediately we walked down, so we saw the Hoover Dam, and then we walked down kind of inside the canyon, and we got in a little raft, and we went down the river. I would highly suggest doing this. But one of the cool things about it is we drove. You drive? I guess you drive a boat. We floated up to the Hoover Dam so that you were at the bottom of it looking up at it. And I have to say that being on top of the Hoover Dam is definitely an experience in and of itself. I can't describe how immense it is. Has anyone been to the Hoover Dam? Couple people? It's immensely huge. You know it's so thick that the concrete hasn't stopped drying? There's still liquid concrete in the middle of it. Okay, it's still setting. It's insane that people made this. And being on top of it is a pretty cool experience, but being at the bottom of it is a whole different thing. So you look up, and you feel like you can't look up enough, right? It's just so immensely, overwhelmingly high. And when I did that, I got that feeling in my stomach. You know that feeling like if you're on a cliff edge, right? Anytime there's something kind of risky, or like you go to the zoo, and you hear a lion roar, and your stomach kind of goes, ooh, like, you know you're safe, right? Like the Hoover Dam is not gonna I was picturing like Elmer Fudd, there's like a hole that shoots out water and he sticks his finger in it, and but I know I'm pretty safe at the Hoover Dam. Nothing's going to happen. But you get that sense of like, this is crazy powerful. And even though I'm not in danger, it gives me that kind of feeling in my gut, right? Like when there's a big wave on the beach before a storm, and the waves get really big, and right, they make that big crash and it shakes you, and you feel it. Now, I didn't get that sound from the Hoover Dam, but I got that feeling, right, of immensity, of enormity. How much more is God great if that's what human beings made? The roar of a lion. That's like, they're big. They're not that big. Human beings made the Hoover Dam. These are like the tiniest little slivers of greatness compared to how great God is. Now, throughout this talk, don't get me wrong, I'm going to be talking about the greatness of God. Whoops. But I'm not talking right now, I'll hit on it a little bit, about having a personal relationship. We talk about that a lot in church, having a personal relationship. I am not taking away from the importance of that at all. If you keep coming out to these, we're going to get there. Okay, we will get to the importance of having a personal relationship. But tonight I want to focus on the greatness of God. Mostly, how God is incomprehensible. This was actually one of my daughter's spelling words. Practicing her spelling test with her, it was comprehensible. And she said, what does comprehensible mean? And I said, comprehensible means you can understand it, and incomprehensible means that you can't understand it. And I said, tomorrow night, this was last night that I was doing this, I said, tomorrow night at the church, I'm giving a comprehensible talk on the incomprehensible nature of God. Use that in your sentence for school. So she had to learn about this word. Incomprehensible. Anyone remember these things? If you were born after 1990, you probably don't know what these are, okay, these magic eye things. These were all the rage for a little while, right? There were books in the library. We had one of these hanging in my house. People, I have never seen one of these things in my life. It's just, you're supposed to be able to look at these and they form a picture, right? Some of you might be able to look at that right now and see a picture. I just see a bunch of colors. Apparently the one in my house was like an eagle flying down over the water with a fish in its claw. It was just a bunch of blots of color to me. I'd stare at it, because I was maybe 12 years old. I'd stare at it for an hour. I would not blink, my eyes would go dry, right? And I couldn't see it. And then people would be like, well, you have to look at it different ways. So I'd walk by it and go, nope, still didn't see it. I was looking at it in all these ways. It was completely incomprehensible. I actually think that maybe nobody sees them, and it's just an inside joke that people say that they can see them. They're not actually a thing. Okay, it's completely incomprehensible. So a theologian who kind of talked about this man by the name of Rudolf Otto, he lived between 1869 and 1937, and he was a profound influence on theologians such as Karl Barth and C.S. Lewis. If you're a theologian, if you're a theology nerd, you know those names. C.S. Lewis wrote Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, okay? But he wrote about something called the numinous. Now, numinous is a word, comes from a Latin root of numen, and if you look it up in the dictionary, it will probably say something like a spiritual experience or having to do with a spiritual experience. What the numinous is that idea of experiencing something that is other than yourself. So that experience of when you hear a lion roar, when you hear a wave crash, and you think, how amazing is God? Or just, there's something more than this. When you look at, a starlit sky, which you can't see in the city, but if you're camping, and you go, whoa, how amazing is God, right? It's that sense of this presence that is overpowering and overwhelming. He writes about it like this. He says, the feeling of it may at times come sweeping like a gentle tide, pervading the mind with a tranquil mood of deepest worship. A tranquil mood of deepest worship. It may pass over into a more set and lasting attitude of the soul, continuing, as it were, thrillingly vibrant and resonant, until at last it dies away, and the soul resumes its profane, non-religious mood of everyday experience. So what he's pointing out here, just to summarize that, is he's saying that we have these experiences of approaching the numinous, this thing that is beyond our body, but we don't stay there, right? Some of you may have had those experiences in your life. People usually call these conversion experiences, right? I really felt the presence of God, and I knew that God was present. And then you go home and your kids are screaming and you're angry at your husband or whatever it is that's going on, right? And all of a sudden you're right back into everyday life, right? For some reason, we can't stay in that space. We just get little glimmers of it. He continues on to say, it has its crude, barbaric antecedents and early manifestations, and again it may be developed into something beautiful and pure and glorious. It may become the hushed, trembling, and speechless humility of the creature in the presence of whom, or what? In the presence of that which is a mystery, inexpressible and above all creatures. So he is saying that God is inexpressible. So I am now trying to give you a talk on the fact that we cannot actually talk about God. Because when we start to talk about God, we failed. Because we can't express him in words. What is that experience that I described? That presence of God. Like, when you try to explain that to someone, does it really capture what happened? Usually not. Right? And that's within our human limitation, too. So bring that even down another level. There's this saint, St. John Chrysostom. There we go. St. John Chrysostom. Whenever I hear this name, I think about this stuff. What's this called? And nobody said the same thing. Worcestershire. I say Worcestershire. I've heard Worcester, Worcester. And I'm pretty sure that the same person will say it differently every time they ask for it. Okay, I mean, I'm sure that there's a right saying. Okay, St. John Chrysostom is not that hard, but I have to think about it. I got to slow down when I'm going to say his name, okay? St. John Chrysostom. Otherwise, I'm going to end up in Chrysostom or something like that. So, St. John Chrysostom. He wrote a series of homilies. I shouldn't say he wrote them. He delivered them, and they were transcribed. And these homilies, 12 of them were collected into a collection called On the Incomprehensible Nature of God. So you don't have to be here, you can just go read that book. Okay? On the incomprehensible nature of God. One of the homilies, he is preaching on a reading from 1 Corinthians. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, it says, where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. And when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we will see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. Now these three remain, faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. Okay, this is Paul talking about the incomprehensible nature of God. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. Everything we know about God will eventually not really matter, because what we know right now is not even close to who God is. It will pass away. For we know in part, we prophesy in part, and when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. Now I love this reading because I've seen it in confirmation cards and stuff like that. It's always taken out of context. Okay, this whole, when I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, and I reasoned like a child. People use this quote, they take it out of context, and they use it as becoming an adult. That's not actually what this quote is about, folks. Okay, let's put it in its context. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, and I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. He is using this as a description of what it will be like to be face to face with God. What he is saying is that right now, all of us, whether you're 9 or 90, We are all children, and our knowledge is like that of a child. I have 4 children. They can be dumb. Okay? They come and they tell you stories, and you're just like, yeah. Yeah, and they're like, yeah, and then the dinosaurs came and they ate everyone. Yes, they did. Yeah, it's the dinosaurs that messed up your room. That's right. And they tell these silly stories, and you entertain them because they're not quite that smart. Right? That's what we're like in the face of what God is. We are pretty dumb. So he says that what happens is we are children. We think like children. We reason like children. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. There's a story of, now I don't know how true this is, but St. Thomas Aquinas, who wrote massive volumes of work, who read even more. He's probably one of the most learned people in the history of humankind. There's a story that when he was on his deathbed, in his library surrounded by books, there was a moment before death when he sort of came to, and he looked around and he said, all of this is nothing. It was that passing of childhood into adulthood. He was realizing everything that I have read and researched and written is like the knowledge of a child compared to the greatness of God. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. This is the personal relationship. And now these 3 remain, faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. So St. John Chrysostom, when he talks about this, he says this. This is from one of his homilies. It says, Paul said this because on the one hand, he knows that God exists, whereas on the other, he does not know what God is in his essence. We can say that God exists. We do not know what God is. He knows that God is wise, but he does not know how great his wisdom is. He knows that God is great, but he does not know how or what his greatness is. He also knows that God is everywhere present, but he does not know how this is so. He knows that God provides for all things and that he preserves and governs them to perfection, but he does not know the way in which God does all these things. Therefore, he said, our knowledge is imperfect and our prophesying is imperfect. God is so great that all of our knowledge about him, even this talk, is ultimately imperfect. When Moses encounters the burning bush, he asks God who he is. He says, when I go back, who do I tell them you are? God responds, the full response is Aya, Asher, Aya. I'm going to, some of you will remember this if you're into pop music, okay? Good way to remember what God said, Aya, the Hebrew word. This guy, Ocast, Heya. Anyone know that song? Hey, Aya. Aya, okay? Now you won't forget. Okay, Aya, which translates into, I am. So when he says, like, who are you? What do I tell people? God says, I am. The full translation, Aya, Asher, Aya, it can be translated as, I am because I am, or I am that I am. I am who I am. So God, in defining himself, can only say, I am. It's the only thing that God can say about himself that we will understand. If he said more, we would not understand it. To say that God exists, it's not quite right. Existence only is because God is. God is not a creature. He is not created. I don't know what that means, but it's the truth of God. We can say that God is love, that God is hope, that God is faith. We know that our faith and hope and our love come from the Holy Spirit, which is God within us. So even those 3 things, faith, hope, and love, we are incapable of without God. That's the greatness of God, that God cannot even say something to us that would define him any more than I am. So you might be asking, why does any of this matter? Why does this matter to us? Our theme here, that we're going to speak about, and that Father Owen Connolly is going to speak about at the mission, is on identity. Who are we as Stella Maris? And I believe that as Stella Maris, this is a concept of God that we have to concretely understand if we are ever going to do mission effectively. That we need to understand that greatness of God. The personal relationship is important, and like I said, we're going to get here. But here's why it matters. Years ago, I used to do... Nope, I skipped the slide. Where'd it go? Okay, it's missing. Years ago, I used to do strongman competitions. Okay, so I lifted cars and picked up big rocks and did all kinds of stuff like that, all the stuff that you see on TV. So I did that years ago. There are certain events in strongman that are called carrying events. They're typically for 100 feet. It's like a finish line, chalked out on the asphalt, and you carry something from one spot to another, right? It was Arnold Schwarzenegger one time, right? When they said, what do you do for a living? He said, I pick things up and I put them down, right? That's what I did, okay? So sometimes you would carry things. Typically, you would do like a farmer's walk, which is carrying like a big weight in each hand. The most I ever did was 320 pounds in each hand. And you carry it to the finish line. Or a yoke walk, which is like weight on your back. Did 830 pounds for 100 feet. And then I felt sick the next day because it like compresses your spine. It's really hard on your body. So I did not want to carry these things one step further than I had to. I wanted to get to that finish line and be done with it because it hurt and it sucked. And I never ever did very well in those events until one of my competitors said to me, he said, when you do those, when you're doing a carrying event, where are you looking? And I kind of like paused. It's like, well, I don't know. He goes, when you look with your eyes, what are your eyes focused on? I said, the finish line. That's where I want to get to. I want to get there as quick as possible. That's your problem. I said, you're not going to the finish line. He said, you're going to that tree over there, or that house, or that car. I said, way over there. I said, that's where your eyes go, and that's where you convince yourself in your head that you have to get to. So I started practicing this in training. I would train at a friend's house on his road. He lived on like a cul-de-sac, and I'd pick, this tree that was down the way, and that's where I was going to run to with this weight. Next competition I did, I came in second place in the yoke walk, and it was by less than a second. Okay, it was super fast, because all of a sudden, I wasn't slowing down. If I was looking at the finish line, then as I got to the finish line, I would start to slow down. My pace would change, because I didn't want to take an extra step. So everything about me would get slower as I came to my goal. But if I set my goal further than that, if I said I have to get over there, even though it's not humanly possible, I would fall to pieces, I would charge right through that line. They could have put that line 10 feet further, and I still would have made it in the same time. This matters. Here we go. This matters when we are going to set our goals. Are we setting our goals as a parish based upon our limited vision of what is possible? If we acknowledge that this immense, enormous, indescribable, incomprehensible God, who when I start to talk about him, I fail. In fact, St. John Chrysostom, he actually asked the question if it was even safe to talk about God. Because he said that as soon as you start to talk about God, it actually is kind of demeaning. Because God is so great that we think that we can bring him down to our language. This is all God said that he was. He said, I am. If we set our goals based on that God, or just on what we think he's capable of. Everyone close your eyes for a second. I want you to picture what you think the wild success of Stella Maris would look like. What would it look like in here, right now, if Stella Maris was a wildly successful church? Would every pew be full? Would there be people standing at the back? Would we have to turn people away because the fire marshal wouldn't let us have any more because we're beyond occupancy? Would we open up the hall and live stream down there for people to watch? Would there be people watching the live stream that Toby's working on all over the world? When you go to work tomorrow, would people talk about what happened here tonight? Go beyond that. What would our impact look like in the community? Would everybody out there know exactly what happens in this building? Would they know that this building is a place where they can be served, where they can go when they need help, when they're struggling, when they're depressed, when they're lost, when they're scared, when their life's falling apart, that they know 100% whether they are a member or not, whether they have set foot inside of here or not, that this place would serve them? What would that look like? How would we impact Halifax? How would we impact Nova Scotia? I want you to think in your own mind, what would you add to that I have not mentioned? You can open your eyes. All of that is too small. All of that is too limited. We're looking at the goal line that's marked on the asphalt. We're not looking at the greatness of God. We have to believe that more than what we can think of is what God is capable of. And if you think that God is not capable of that, then you and I worship two very different gods. God is capable. We are not. What is our goal? Is it limited by our comprehension or by the incomprehensible nature of God? I was on a date in university. I had one date with her. She was a lovely person. I liked first dates. My love language is quality time, so I just like hanging out with people in general, friends, my wife, my children, whoever it is. And I have a lot of first dates just because I like to be adventurous and go do things with people. So this young girl, now I can't even remember what we did or where we went, but the way that the night kind of wrapped up was that we were downtown on the waterfront in Halifax, and so I had just learned, like recently, I'd kind of gotten decently good at playing guitar, right? Like I could play and sing, and maybe not miss too many notes or chords, right? I could keep time. I wasn't great, but I could play, and so I thought, I'm going to impress this girl with my musical talents. And so I put my guitar in the trunk of the car, and then I just happened to have it there with me at the end of this date on the Halifax waterfront on a nice summer night. And so I pulled out my guitar, and I knew like a couple just kind of pop rock songs, and I knew a couple church songs. And I could not, for the life of me, think of any pop rock song. The only thing that was coming to mind, like off the top of my head, were church songs. This girl did not go to church. So I was like, okay, Ronnie, this is now an opportunity for evangelization. I don't know where this date is going to go. She might think you're a weirdo, but hey, you're going to tell her about Jesus. Okay, so so I was like, I told her, I was like, I can't think of anything but church songs. She was like, that's great, play one of those church songs. So I played one. And as I was playing, people were walking by. I've never been shy, so I didn't mind that people were walking by downtown as I was playing guitar. A couple people tried to throw money in my guitar case. It's like, no, that's not a thing. So I played this song, and this one lady stopped, and she asked. She kind of like quietly, like in between verses, she was like, "Do you mind if I stay and listen?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, you can stay and listen." And so I was playing, and as I was playing, she eventually started to cry, and I thought, man, I didn't think I was that bad. And so she's crying. So I stop and I ask her if she's okay, and she starts telling us this story. She was from Prince Edward Island, and her husband, this is what they did every year. Amazing, amazing couple. Okay, I wish somehow I could get in contact with these people, because it was a moment that I might never know who this woman was or see her again. But her and her husband save up all year for their trip. You know, their couples trip. But what they do is they go to a city somewhere in Canada and they pray with homeless people. That's what they did for their vacation, right? Really, really cool. So she told us that she had come to Halifax, her and her husband. They had kind of gone in separate directions for the night to pray with different people. And she told me that she was getting rejected. She was really having an awful time, right? Like nobody wanted to pray with her. She was kind of getting, told like impolite things, and she said that she was walking around downtown Halifax and she was praying, like, God, why do I do this? Like, why am I here? Are you even here? Do you even care about this? Or that I'm doing this? Are you even with me? Is this just me wanting to feel holy and do this thing so that I think that I'm a good person? She said, and then I heard your music. And you were singing about the presence of Jesus. And I knew that that was God's answer to me. Okay, I had no idea that playing that song was going to have that sort of reach. Because God is greater than I am. And God can use me for great things so long as I am surrendered to them. Things that are way beyond the goal line that I'm looking at. If I acknowledge that the goal is further. St. Teresa of Avila said, you pay God a compliment by asking great things of him. You pay him a compliment because you are recognizing his greatness when you ask great things. Some people say, I've heard people say, they're like, oh, I can't pray for that. I'm like, what God do you worship? We worship this great God. So as Stella Maris, are we ready to pay God a compliment? Are we ready to stop looking at the lines that we have drawn as the goal, to start believing that there is way more, way further? And are we ready to say that God is great? Thank you.